Hidden heaven on earth. Bosnia and Herzegovina is the most underrated country in Europe. Its picturesque scenic towns and villages and serene turquoise waters steal your heart. The country was under the Ottoman rule between 1463 to 1908, which vastly makes up the Muslim culture and which is one of the reasons of the rich Islamic architecture and Turkish-inspired culture, which can be seen and felt throughout. It is one of the richest countries in history, culture, beauty, food and hospitality. Welcome to Bosnia and Herzegovina. Welcome to Bosnia. Okay guys, we thought we've just finished for the day, पर क्या हुआ कि हमें ना यहाँ पे he's a really nice young guy we met and he's going to give us a tour of the old city. हालांकि हम सब कुछ देख चुके हैं मगर he will be giving us more information about some things. And there is the guy, he's called Jamaluddin. He's 19-year-old and he's very informative. So inshallah इसके साथ हम अभी tour करेंगे and we'll see.
The most western border of the Ottoman Empire actually, and so the Croats and the Catholics actually felt like they were being suppressed in a way, and they actually just came recently 200 years ago, so during the Austro-Hungarian War of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which started in 1878. So them coming to Sarajevo is a new thing, and they didn't have their own church, so decided to build this one. I don't know if you can see the resemblance, but it's said to be inspired by the Notre Dame Church in Paris. Okay. I don't actually believe that, but it's said, and that's something that a lot of tour guides will tell you. But I'll mention two more things about it. The guy in front of it, that's Pope John Paul II.
Oh, okay, yeah, he looks like him.
Yeah, he resembles.
He's not that large.
No, he wasn't that large, they've expanded him.
Yeah, about two times, maybe.
Two times, yeah.
So the thing is, we wouldn't actually give him a statue here if he wasn't important to Sarajevo in some capacity. Okay. So he actually was the first major not a political but religious leader to come to Sarajevo after the war. And he came here in 1997. The original plan was him to come here in 1994. So you can imagine
it
because
delayed.
the siege, because the war, that wasn't possible. So as soon as he could find time in his, but those bullet holes serve as a reminder that not only Muslims were in the war and not only Muslims were affected by the war. So you will see the bullet holes everywhere, and they serve as a reminder of the war, and that we can't let ourselves allow the same thing to happen again. Yeah. So forgive. So I don't know if you can see the resemblance, but it's called the Rose of Sarajevo. So the reason why it's called the Rose of Sarajevo, it's actually because 329 grenades every day fell on Sarajevo during the siege, on average. But the most grenades that ever fell in the city were a day was 3,000. Imagine being bombarded every 2.5 minutes. And we call them the Roses of Sarajevo, and there's more than 1,000 roses in Sarajevo. Mostly, if you call it a Jamia.
We call it Jamia as well.
That's great because I hate the word mosque. Yeah. Not the mosque itself. I feel like that's such a rough term. Yeah. A mosque, but a Jamia is something that's inviting.
Yeah. Jamia refers people kind of come together.
Yeah. So I don't know a lot about this Jamia, but I do know that it's my neighborhood Jamia. So I actually, by some rule, you know that the neighborhoods has. Every neighborhood had its specific mosque and Jamia. So that's even during the Ottoman Empire. And I think it was constructed somewhere in the 17th century. And it's a lot for Jews in Syria. So from the Spanish Inquisition that happened in the 15th century, the Jews were prosecuted from Spain, from France, from Germany, and from all over the place. And the thing is that the Ottomans invited them to come here. Sheikh Pasha actually granted them the land here that you see here, which is now the old temple, the old Jewish temple. But it was never a synagogue, per se, but it was always a sanctuary and a temporary housing for Jews. So they built it in stone. And it actually burned down a couple more times, but never to the point of not being able to reconstruct it. So It was built in 1581. I don't know if I mentioned that. I only mentioned the Sephardi Jews here. And this new temple was built in 1820. And there's not a lot of things that are interesting to say about this old new temple, but it's also important to mention that an Ashkenazi synagogue currently resides just over the river.
Okay.
So you have in a 1 kilometer radius, you have a synagogue, you have a mosque, you have a cathedral, you have an Orthodox church. And I also can't go here without mentioning the Holocaust, because Sarajevo, as did not the rest of Europe, wasn't saved from the Holocaust and the Nazis. So in Sarajevo, just before the World War II happened, it was reported that 15,000 Jews were residing there. So in a population of 150,000 then, so 10% were Jews. Sadly, 12,000 of them were killed during the Holocaust. And the number of 3,000 Jews that remained, of course, they hid in basements. Muslims hid them, Christians hid them. Everybody hid them. Everybody was your neighbor, and everybody wanted to go out of their way to help you. So the Bosnian church was actually very similar to Islam and Muslim culture. So they prayed 5 times a day. They had a chief of the church, so called Dida, which means directly translated means granddad, but he was always an older fellow with much experience, much wiser than the rest of them. So when the Ottomans came here, so the main religion was the Church of Bosnia, and they saw the similarities, but they also saw the amount of detail in Islam, and they just jumped ship immediately. So no force, no. That's why even today Bosnia is a majority Muslim country. Does this remind you of anything?
Yeah, the Grand Bazar.
Grand Bazar of
And
Istanbul.
this is the small bazaar.
The small bazaar.
So you can see probably that most of the stuff here are very touristy stuff, very fake stuff.
It's as if it's all come from Turkey.
Oh, just go outside.
Let's go outside.
Sellers would come from all over the world, so from China, from Turkey, so from Spain, from Germany. They would come from all over the world with their goods, and they could stay here for 3 days. The idea was to get Sarajevo's main name mentioned as lot as could be
Going
mentioned.
that way?
No, we were just going to stay here to
Okay.
mention the Goldsmith Street. So just like in Ottoman times, a lot of streets in Sarajevo are named after the tradesmen that worked there. So this would be the Goldsmith Street. Actually, it just got recently renamed the Gazil Bey Street, and I will get to Gazil Bey in a short
Yes.
while. So we wanted to make Sarajevo a marketplace of sorts, a place of trading.
Yeah.
So every time somebody would come to Sarajevo, they would have 3 days for free to stay and eat and drink and bathe and everything that they needed to survive. So just for them to come to us for the goods, to get us the most,
Excellent.
the newest goods, the best goods, or the best silks. So this mosque.
We prayed a Jumu'ah today here.
Yes.
I was there too.
You was there too? Okay.
Yeah, so this is the main congressional mosque in Sarajevo. But it's not only important for Sarajevo, it's not only important for Bosnia, it's important also to Croatia, Serbia, and Slovenia, as well, and Montenegro as well. So because it was built in the 17th century and it stands 30 meters high, but what's interesting about it, it's just before the Austro-Hungarians came, they replaced the mechanism with the same one that is being used in back then.
Okay.
Well, I've noticed it got Arabic numbers on.
No, the mechanism itself.
Yeah, I know mechanism. Yes, yes.
And it was actually built by a firm named Gillette and Black
Okay.
in this 19th century. And
There's
so
the
you can
clock
feel the
tower.
coldness, you can feel the sense of harmony. So now we're in the place where Franz Ferdinand was shot. Yes, and I will tell you a little bit about it, just so we pass the bridge. I'm a bit tired, and I would like to sit on the steps. So this is my photo today. So what I want to mention that this park actually was a public hanging spot during the entire of the Ottoman Empire. So when the Austro-Hungarians came in 1878, they actually reestablished this park as a music pavilion. so the place where concerts would be held. So it went literally from a hanging spot to a hanging out spot.
Yes.
I like that.
So that's a joke that my sister came up with. I don't like to take credit for it.
Good.
So my brother will take a seat, you can too if you want to. But the street you were on is probably the most important street, historically speaking, in the 20th century. He probably told you that the Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated there, which is true. But I will tell you.
Mosque, but I did not tell you.
Oh, I didn't know this was the part of the mosque too. We saw it today. Wow.
It's actually a huge complex. Do you go inside?
Yes, we did.
That's
Yeah.
great, so that I don't have to. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
So it was built in 1460 originally out of wood, and it was burned down in 1506 by a guy named Brunovic, and he's a Serbian guy. He came here and
Again,
burned-
Serbian.
Yeah, always tensions with Serbia, always. And he burned down the mosque, and Gaziosef Bey made another mosque in this spot. And I already told you about the Gaziosef
Yes.
mosque and the Empror's mosque. Sorry about it. And now we'll go up to the city hall. Don't worry.
I think it has a bit of Spanish Moorish architecture
So
to it as well.
the architecture style is called pseudo-Mori style.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's kind of Mori, but not exactly.
Yes.
So the goal was to make a city hall because Sarajevo never had a city hall because of the Ottoman Empire. So we really didn't need one. So the Pashas who were in charge of the city, they had their own houses, and when they needed somebody, they met at their own house.
Okay.
That's what I'm trying to say. So when the Austro-Hungarians came, they realized that there's no city hall, and they decided to show off their might in a way.
Okay.
And so they decided on this place, especially because this is one of the entrances to Sarajevo. And the first thing for somebody who comes to Sarajevo to see the Austro-Hungarians style. So streets in Sarajevo.
Yeah.
So it was established in the beginning of the 16th century. And it was actually its main function was cauldron making. So cauldron making for the Ottoman army then. So cauldrons are something you carry water with. So making cauldron is a difficult job in metalworking, especially. So the guys who made cauldrons got very, very good with the hammer and copper because everything is made out of copper. So they realized that they could make pans, they could make jezwas. Do you say jezwas?
Jezwas.
So that's the coffee.
Mashkis, we would say. But that is the leather one, the one I know about.
So a lot of them started making that, and actually grinders for coffee. For other coffee. And those were the best grinders anywhere. I already told you that Sarajevo was an important hotspot for culture, for markets, for trading and that sort of things. But what I didn't tell you that everybody who would go from Spain, Germany, Austria to Sarajevo, he would not to Sarajevo but to Hajj, he would have to pass through Sarajevo. So Sarajevo was actually the main lead to Istanbul at that time. So you can probably imagine the map in your head now, and you can see how that works. So, in the Arabic Peninsula, there's not a lot of water. The thing was, with water, it was a good deed to give out waters to foreigners, to travelers. So, in the Arabic Peninsula, there's not a lot of water, so they would always give water and food to strangers. Every time some tourist comes here, he always tells me, actually the water is beautiful from the city. I ask,
I knew this was a landmark of Sarajevo,
That's like
this one.
this one. Okay.
but I never knew the the story behind it. Why is it important, and all the.
Just like fountains, you will see all over the Ottoman Empire, and that's something like the purpose. So that's somewhat of the purpose. Just to give out water for free, it's a good deed.
It's a good
Yeah.
deed. Yes, it is.
Like this,
Thank you very
I will
much for
finish my
watching,
tour.
and do not
Thank
forget.
you so
Thank
much.
you very
Bye-bye.
much. That was so
And also
nice. You could be notified every time we upload a new video. Thank you. Bye.